Welcome back to Madman Review. So, you're in your own home, and suddenly you're facing a terrifying break-in. Your heart's pounding, adrenaline's pumping, and you're thinking of grabbing that one thing you know will keep you safe. Your trusty AR-15. Sounds like a clear-cut case of self-defense, right? Not so fast. In this video, we'll take a look at how the intersection of gender, gun types, and people's biases can turn a self-defense scenario into a legal minefield. Get ready as we unpack the surprising ways an AR-15 could send you to prison, even when you think you're on the right side of the law. This is one video you'll want to view before you decide what's under your bed for that just-in-case moment. Inconsistent gun laws. Texas, 1991. A regular day turned tragic in a killing restaurant. Amid the chaos, Dr. Gracia Hupp, a diner there, faced an unthinkable situation. She could have intervened, maybe even stopped the massacre if only she'd had her handgun with her. But the law, as it stood, left her unarmed and helpless. Her gun was legally confined to her car. This moment of powerlessness didn't just stay with Dr. Gracia Hupp. It resonated across Texas and beyond. Fast forward to 1995, Dr. Gracia Hupp stands before legislators. Her story, not just a personal tragedy, but a catalyst for change. Her words weren't just emotional. They were a searing critique of the laws that disarmed her in a critical moment. This wasn't about politics. It was about personal safety, about the right to defend oneself. And Texas listened. Dr. Gracia Hupp's testimony became a pivotal force in shaping Texas's concealed carry law. It was a game changer, showing how personal stories can cut through the legislative noise to enact real change. But there's another key player in this legislative drama, Sharon Jo Rambos. Her story took a different turn. In the same year, she defended her home with an AR-15. Yet, her testimony didn't resonate in the halls of Congress the way Dr. Gracia Hupp's did. Instead, it became a part of the narrative that led to the assault weapons ban. 2 women, 2 firearms, 2 very different outcomes in the complex and often contentious world of gun legislation. Gun ownership in the U.S. It's pretty wild. Nearly half the homes across the country have a gun, and it's not just for hunting or shooting cans off a fence anymore. Nowadays, a lot of folks have a gun for one main reason: home invasion. You wouldn't believe how often guns are actually used for defense. We're talking somewhere between 1 to 2 million times a year. Yeah, that's 1 to 2 million with an M. People are reaching for their guns not because they're out hunting deer, but because they want to feel secure in their own homes. This whole gun scene in America, it's shifting big time. It used to be about heading out to the woods, maybe bagging a buck or hitting some targets for fun. But now, it's a lot more about having that peace of mind, knowing you've got something to protect yourself and your family just in case. But hey, this isn't just a simple change. With more folks buying guns for protection, there's a whole bunch of stuff to think about. Safety's a biggie. I mean, owning a gun for protection is one thing, but knowing how to use it safely and responsibly, that's another ballgame. So here's the deal. Guns are a huge part of life in the States, and their role is kinda changing. It's less about outdoor sports and more about feeling safe. And as this conversation keeps going, and trust me, it's a conversation that's not going anywhere anytime soon, understanding why people are buying guns these days is pretty key to getting the whole picture. Psychological impact of guns. Now, let's get to the topic, something that might or might not surprise you about guns. It's not just about owning them, it's about how they mess with people's heads in courtrooms. You see, having a gun around isn't just a statement. It plays mind games and even sways legal stuff. First off, let's talk about eyewitness memory. Imagine you're chilling, and suddenly there's a crime happening right in front of you. If there's a gun in the mix, that's probably all you're gonna remember. It's like our brains get laser focused on the weapon and kind of blur out everything else. This weapons focus effect isn't just some theory. Yeah, it's real, and it can seriously tweak what witnesses remember in court. Now, let's chat about the vibes guns give off. They don't just sit there, they stir up stuff. Like, just seeing a gun can make some people, usually the anti-gunners, think more aggressively. It's this whole weapons effect thing. The mere sight of a gun can crank up the aggression levels in folks' minds. Kind of wild, right? But here's where it gets really interesting. In the courtroom, the way a gun looks can totally sway a jury. If you're on jury duty and the case involves a gun and that gun looks mean and aggressive, like an AR-15, it can color how jurors who don't like guns see the whole situation. Some might think the person who used it is more guilty or deserves a harsher sentence, even if the facts are the same as a case with a less intimidating-looking gun. So, unfortunately, what this all means is guns aren't just self-defense tools anymore. They can mess with people's heads and influence some pretty important decisions. And if only for this reason, a Ruger Mini 14 would be a better choice for home defense than an AR-15. Scare factor. So, how does the look of a gun really change the game, both in people's minds and in the courtroom? Here's the deal. When it comes to guns, looks matter. A lot. Take a weapon that's got that hardcore military vibe. Like again, an AR-15. It's not just a gun, it's a weapon of war. And that statement often screams bad news to a lot of folks. This isn't just about gun enthusiasts, it's about anyone who sees it. A mean-looking gun doesn't just say, "I'm here for protection." It kind of yells, "I mean business," and not always in a good way. In the gun community, there's a bit of a divide about these tough-looking firearms. Some folks are all about them, thinking they're the bee's knees for protection or just because they're cool. But others, they're not so keen. You know, the FUDs. They see an AR-15, they think those are overkill, especially for everyday stuff like home defense. But where it really gets interesting is in court. Let's say someone used one of these intimidating guns in self-defense. The moment that jury sees a photo of that firearm, yeah, it's game on. That gun's not just a piece of evidence, it's a character witness. And that's not saying nice things, especially to FUD jurors. It can make them think the shooter was way more aggressive than they might have been. Oh, and here's the twist. If the shooter's a woman, the stakes are even higher. A woman using a big, scary-looking AR-15? Yeah, it throws people for a loop. It challenges all sorts of stereotypes about women and guns. And sadly, this can backfire big time in court. A woman with an AR-15 might as well have a sign that says, "Judge me harder," because that's often what happens. Gender influence. Speaking of women, let's expound how gender plays a big role in the courtroom, especially when it comes to shooters. It's like there's this invisible rule book on who can handle a gun and how. And if you don't play by these unspoken rules, well, things can get tough. First up, women who are good with guns. You'd think being competent is a good thing, right? Well, as I alluded to earlier, if a woman knows her way around a firearm and uses one, especially in self-defense, she might not get the kind of pat on the back you'd expect. Instead, she could face some serious side-eye in court. It's like breaking the mold of what some folks think women should be like. That doesn't always sit well with a lot of leftist anti-gun retards. Okay, now, flip the script. Let's say a guy's in court for using a gun, but he's not exactly sharpshooting material. You might think he'd get some sympathy, right? Nope. It's often the opposite. There's this expectation that guys should just naturally be good with guns. So if a dude's clumsy or unsure with a firearm, it could actually make him look worse in the eyes of the law. Talk about a double standard. But wait, there's more. Women sitting on juries, they might bring their own perspectives. They're often tougher on shooters, dishing out harsher sentences. And if the gun in question looks like something from a war movie, like an AR-15, that can crank up the severity even more. It's like the scarier the gun, the harsher the judgment. Heavily biased anti-AR-15 jury system. There's this interesting research online called Will It Hurt Me in Court by Dr. Glenn Meyer. This research was done on guns and how people react to them in legal situations. It's all about how the type of gun someone uses can really sway what happens in court. So what they did was they set up mock trials with pretend jurors. They wanted to see how the type of gun used in a self-defense case would affect what the jurors thought. And guess what? The kind of gun made a big difference, especially if it was something like an AR-15. Turns out, when someone used an AR-15 for self-defense, the mock jurors were more likely to hand out tougher sentences. It's like they saw that big, menacing gun and thought, whoa, this person must have been up to no good. But here's where it gets even more interesting. If the shooter was a woman using an AR-15, the jurors were even harder on her. It's like they couldn't wrap their heads around a woman needing such a hardcore weapon. And there's another twist. The study showed that women jurors were brutal. They tended to find defendants guilty more often than not, no matter if the defendant was a guy or a gal. They often had a stricter view of the whole situation. What's cool about this research is that it gives us a peek into how people think about guns and self-defense. It's not just about the facts of the case. It's also about how the gun looks and who's using it. A scary-looking AR-15 can make people think one thing, while a less aggressive Mini-14 might give off a totally different vibe. Anti-AR-15 cops. Oh, and if you think police officers being all professional and experienced with guns would be pretty neutral about different types of firearms, turns out even they aren't immune to anti-gun biases. When male police officers used AR-15s and ended up in a legal jam, they faced tougher consequences. It's like everyone expected them to handle these powerful guns without any hiccups. So, when things went south, they got judged more harshly. It's as if using an AR-15 set the bar higher for these guys. But hold on. Gets more complicated with female officers. When women in uniform used standard handguns and found themselves in hot water, they got judged even more severely. It's kind of a double whammy. On one hand, there's this expectation that a woman cop should be able to handle a basic handgun. No sweat. But on the other hand, if she messes up, it's like she broke some unwritten law of how female officers should perform. So, in a weird twist, using a more ordinary gun, like a handgun, can actually backfire for female officers. This whole thing shows how deep-seated beliefs about gender and guns can influence how police officers are seen and treated, even among their own. It's not just about what happened or what gun was used, but also about who used it. A male officer with a fancy rifle? He better be perfect. A female officer with a handgun? She's under the microscope. Big time. And that wraps up this video. What it all boils down to is awareness. Whether you're wearing a badge, protecting your home, or fighting the good fight in court, understanding how biases about a gun's scare factor and your gender can play out is important.